Marco had always felt like the world forgot to make space for him. His small village was a place of cracked roads, rusted roofs, and endless days that repeated like an old song nobody cared to listen to anymore. Yet every night, when the sky turned dark and the streetlight at the corner flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or die out, Marco found a kind of magic in the quiet. He would sit on the warm concrete with his legs crossed, holding his old, broken radio that needed a hard tap just to catch a signal. The voices that came through were never clear. Sometimes the singers sounded like they were underwater, sometimes like they were calling from far, far away. But Marco didn't care. Those voices were escape. They were dreams disguised as music. And somewhere between the static, he learned to sing along. He didn't know he had talent, he only knew that singing made his chest feel less heavy. The world could be cruel, but when he sang, his voice softened its edges. One night, as he hummed a slow ballad drifting from the radio, an elderly woman paused beside him. Her face carried a lifetime of storms, but her eyes shone softly. She listened without speaking until Marco realized she was there and stopped, embarrassed. He expected her to laugh or ask him why he was wasting time. Instead, she touched his shoulder and told him words he would remember forever. "Child, you were born with something the world needs. Don't hide it." Marco didn't know how to respond. Compliments were rare in a place where survival didn't leave room for praise. Still, her words traveled inside him, deeper than he expected. Over the next few days, he sang louder, holding notes longer, imagining that maybe, just maybe, his voice meant something. Children began to gather around him, not to mock but to listen. Adults passing by slowed down to hear him sing. Marco didn't understand what was happening, he only knew it felt new. It felt good. And then came the moment that would change everything. A woman from the USA, a tourist exploring the village, walked by as Marco was singing a love song he barely understood. She froze, stunned by the richness of his voice. Instead of walking away, she lifted her phone and recorded him. She smiled, thanked him, and left. Marco went back to singing under his streetlight, unaware that his life had already begun to move in a direction he never imagined. The tourist uploaded the video that same night, expecting maybe a handful of likes from her friends. Instead, the world reacted like it had been waiting for Marco. The clip spread faster than wildfire. Within hours it reached thousands, then millions. People typed comments that said they had to replay the video 10 times. Others said his voice carried a kind of old soul, the kind that hits you before you understand why. Some cried. Some begged to know who the boy was. News channels picked it up. Influencers shared it. Celebrities commented. A few even said they wanted to help him. Meanwhile, Marco had no idea what was happening. His village barely had stable electricity, let alone fast internet. He woke up to neighbors knocking on his door, asking if he knew he was famous. Famous. The word didn't make sense to him. When people gathered around him later that day with phones pointed at his face, he felt scared, confused, and strangely hopeful. Someone handed him their screen and showed him the video. For the first time, he heard himself the way the world heard him. Not through a broken radio or fading echo, but through a clear recording where his voice rose with strength he didn't know he had. Marco's hands trembled. He didn't understand why millions cared. He was just a village boy who had nothing but a voice he discovered by accident. But the world was louder than his doubts now. Messages poured in. Journalists came. Strangers cried when they saw him. Kids screamed his name. Some told him he belonged on a real stage. Marco wasn't sure if it was a blessing or a storm headed straight at him. Fame felt like both. He didn't ask for any of it, yet it was happening faster than he could breathe. And deep inside, beneath the excitement and fear, a tiny spark began to grow. Maybe the old woman had been right. Maybe the world truly needed his voice. Maybe he was meant for something bigger than the boy who sang under a flickering streetlight. A week after the video went viral, Marco's life began to feel like a dream that didn't belong to him. Every morning new strangers showed up in the village asking where they could find the boy with the golden voice. Marco tried to stay calm, but inside he felt like he was standing on a bridge that could collapse at any moment. Then one afternoon, while he was washing clothes in a plastic basin outside his home, a motorcycle rushed toward him and stopped abruptly. The driver handed him an envelope decorated with colors he had only seen in movies. An American flag in the corner. A gold star at the top. His mother came outside, wiping her hands on her skirt, confused and worried. Marco tore open the envelope carefully, his heart pounding like a drum too big for his chest. Inside was a letter, official, stamped, important. He read it once, then again, then a third time because he couldn't believe the words were real. It was an invitation to audition for one of the biggest talent shows in the world. A show he had only seen through tiny clips on borrowed phones. They wanted him. They wanted him. His mother covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe, whispering, my son, this is your miracle." The neighbors gathered around as word spread. Some cheered. Some cried. Some stood there stunned. Marco felt overwhelmed, like the ground itself was moving beneath him. He had never left his village. He had never stepped inside an airport. The idea of flying to America felt impossible, like sending a paper boat across the ocean and hoping it survived the waves. That night, while the village celebrated, Marco sat alone under the streetlight where everything began. He looked up at the stars and wondered if they had been guiding him this whole time. But fear twisted inside him. What if he failed? What if he disappointed everyone who believed in him? What if he wasn't meant for a world so big? His mother sat beside him and placed her hand over his. Courage isn't about being ready, she said softly. It's about going even when you're scared. Marco nodded, still unsure but willing to try. The next few days were a hurricane of preparation. His village donated money for clothes and a small suitcase. Someone printed his passport photo. Someone else taught him how to zip a bag properly. On the morning of his flight, the entire village walked him to the bus stop. People shouted blessings. Children hugged him. Mothers prayed over him. Marco waved until everyone became tiny dots in the distance. He carried nothing but a suitcase, a worn-out pair of shoes, and a voice he hoped was enough to take him somewhere he had never dared to imagine. America was louder than anything Marco had ever experienced. The airport alone felt like a city inside a building. Lights everywhere. Announcements echoing. People rushing with purpose. Marco held his suitcase tightly, afraid he would lose himself in the noise. But when he reached the auditorium, everything changed. A massive building, grand and bright, loomed in front of him. Posters of past winners lined the walls, faces of people who had stood exactly where he was standing now. His hands shook. His chest tightened. When his name was called, he stepped onto the stage, blinded by lights that felt hotter than the sun. The audience was bigger than anything his mind could process. Judges sat in front of him, staring with curiosity and warmth. But Marco couldn't breathe. His throat locked. His heart raced. The music started and his mind went blank. The room fell silent in a way that felt heavy and terrifying. A judge leaned forward and spoke gently, her voice carrying a kindness he desperately needed. Take your time, sweetheart. Sing when you're ready. Marco closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't in America. He was back under the streetlight, feeling the cracked concrete beneath him, hearing the soft hum of his old radio. He pictured his mother's face, tearful and proud. He pictured his village cheering him on. Slowly, he opened his eyes and let his first note rise. It was shaky, but true. Then the next note came stronger. And the next. His voice filled the auditorium like a wave breaking free. The crowd leaned in as if pulled by a force they couldn't explain. His voice carried pain, hope, hunger, survival, every part of the life he had lived. The judge's eyes widened. People in the audience stood before the fame hit Marco faster than he could understand it. One day he was just a boy who sang under a flickering streetlight, and the next he was appearing on magazine covers, talk shows, and news channels all across the world. People said his voice was a miracle, a gift, a once-in-a-generation sound. But behind the cameras and applause, Marco felt something tightening around him, something he couldn't quite name. His schedule was suddenly controlled by adults who talked fast, walked fast, and made decisions without asking him how he felt. They told him what to wear, how to stand, what to say in interviews. They gave him jackets too shiny, shoes too expensive, and told him to smile even when his face felt heavy. Fans adored him, but the pressure of perfection pressed on him every day. People online picked at everything he did, the way he spoke, the way he moved, his accent, even the way he dressed. Some mocked his simple background, calling him a street boy pretending to be a star. Marco tried to ignore it, but late at night the words felt like needles under his skin. He wished he could go back to the quiet nights under the streetlight where nobody judged him for being imperfect. Meanwhile, brands sent offers, wanting him to promote products he'd never heard of. Record labels competed for him. Reporters asked questions too deep for someone his age, digging into his poverty like it was entertainment. Marco often sat in green rooms with bright makeup lights reflecting his tired face, wondering if fame always cost more than it gave. Yet every time he felt like breaking, he remembered his mother's words and the people back home. They believed in him. They needed him to keep going. The love from fans also warmed him. Some wrote letters explaining how his voice helped them through sickness, heartbreak, or loneliness. A girl from Texas sent him a bracelet she made with his name woven into it. A grandmother from Chicago said his singing made her feel young again. Marco carried those messages with him like armor. But even then, loneliness crept in. Despite being surrounded by crowds, he felt more alone than ever. He missed his village, missed the simple life where a song was just a song, not a headline. One night, after a long press day, Marco sat on the edge of his hotel bed staring at the city lights. His voice felt tired, his heart even more so. He whispered to himself, "Is this what I wanted?" Then he remembered why he came: to give his mother a better life, to rise above the circumstances he was born into, to show the world that talent could grow even in the poorest corners. He wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and decided he wouldn't let fame change who he was. He would sing not for fame, not for headlines, but for the people who truly listened. Marco stood up, looked in the mirror, and promised himself he would make it through the storm. His voice was too important to lose in the noise. And deep inside, he knew the world had only heard the beginning of what he could do. Finale night arrived with a weight that made Marco's hands sweat and his heart pulse like a drum trying to break free from his chest. The arena was packed with thousands of people, and millions more watched from their homes across the world. Backstage, contestants buzzed with nervous energy, stylists rushed around like bees, and producers shouted last-minute instructions. Marco stood alone in a corner, eyes closed, whispering a quiet prayer. Not for victory, but for strength. When the stage manager touched his shoulder and said, "You're on in 60 seconds, Marco felt time slow down. The lights darkened. The audience quieted. Smoke drifted across the floor as the screen behind him glowed with soft white light. Marco stepped forward, and for a moment the world felt impossibly big. Then his song began, a song he chose because it told his story better than words ever could.